Hello, welcome to Talking with Famous People. My name is host Derek, and I am here with famous peoples, including the certified adjudicator of interest, namely ENTP Trenton. His name is ENTP today. And we have got famous person Callum, famous person Nandi, Nandi in the house, Homie in the house, and QB Sauce is also in the house. So I've asked them not to move in together, but they've ignored me and they've all moved in together into one house. Anyway, that notwithstanding, we're talking today about the idea that it's interesting and emotion. It's interesting and emotion. Um, I'm going to say interested is the act of committing emotionally to something. Maybe. Let's start with that possible definition and see if we want to attack it or agree with it or whatever.
You have to be committing emotionally to it?
Yeah, to be interested in something is to commit emotionally to it.
Mm.
To commit emotionally is not necessarily to feel emotions about it, but to say, I am opening my emotions to this interesting thing, and if it's going to either provoke or link to or cause or otherwise interact with emotions, then I'm available.
Okay, that makes sense.
But that would make interesting not an emotion. I mean, first of all, interesting is an adjective. Interesting is an adjective that we use to describe something that we're feeling emotions about, right?
That's an interesting way to put it. I'm feeling emotions about this topic. One of them is not interest.
So, okay, are you feeling boredom about this topic, or are you feeling a need to make a quip? I'm not reducing it. I understand that need perfectly well.
No, it's just an interesting topic.
Okay, well, what if I am just sort of intellectually interested in something, like a topic like this? It's fairly self-referential. We're not talking about what happens if your loved one dies. That's going to be something that you have a lot of obvious emotional links to. And we're talking instead about how interest in something relates to one's emotional engagement with that. As a predicate for this conversation is the assumption that we're currently engaged in something that in which the emotional state of the participants is irrelevant to the adjudication of the outcome, usually, except in this particular instance, because we're talking specifically about whether our interest, the thing about which we are analyzing or whatever, is related to our emotional state, then it is relevant in this instance. But normally it wouldn't be, and we normally operate on the assumption that the emotions we're feeling regarding our points are explicitly and implicitly irrelevant. So why is our connection to this then? Why is it that we want to analyze things in this fashion? If it's not that we're emotionally connected to the process of, are we emotionally connected to the process of analysis? Are we emotionally connected to the presentation of ourselves as intelligent people? Are we emotionally connected to the presumed outcome of understanding better, producing general goods for other people? Are we emotionally connected to our own reality in that we want to prove our identity to somebody or something or somehow, or what? What's going on here? Is it type specific?
Interest?
Talking about I'm switching topics sort of. I'm saying instead of talking about interest now, let's talk about what's normally considered emotionally detached analysis, the stuff like we're doing right now. Why is it that we do it if we have no emotional attachment to anything in here? What's motivating the conversation here? What's motivating the desire to do analysis?
I think a big reason that I engage in interest or analysis of something is to, as if I've had an emotional reaction to it, and I'm trying to kind of
demystify?
I'm trying to rid any subjective values I might have attached to it originally.
Okay, well, I mean, ideally, I would say you would be demystifying it in a way that doesn't eliminate some other angles that you're maybe eliminating by approaching it like that. You're trying to get rid of your subjectivity and saying, well, I'm going to make this more objective. It's a tricky question without having first. I mean, it's hard to get out of that box, you know.
Is everything we do, is everything a human does based off of, does it have some emotional origin?
Well, I mean, that's probably.
I guess so.
Which makes us
Then what about like
curious creatures, right? And that we don't.
Who's a person? Are sociopaths without emotion? Not without emotion, but without empathy, right?
Right.
Yeah.
What is there? Is there any human beings who are without emotion? Is that even possible?
Maybe so.
What causes emotion? I mean, is it some kind of chemical?
Well, we talked about this earlier, didn't we?
Well, we discussed the subject, but I don't know if we talked about it from this angle at all, really.
Oh, no, not from this angle, but what emotion, what causes it in general. Or, like, aspects of it.
When a dog makes the decision not to jump off a cliff, is it because there was a decision made that it's some emotional origin, or is it just in its pure form a survival tactic?
I think for a dog, it's just survival.
I think, wouldn't it be for us, let's say we're driving down the road and we're, let's say, trying to avoid wrecking and dying. So we have to engage in some kind of analysis of the road conditions so that we don't wreck and die. Is that from an emotional origin or a survival tactic?
Probably both.
Yeah, I don't think self-preservation is distinct from emotion. I think emotion is one of the judging approaches we take in preserving ourselves. And so we know logically that if I do this action that ends up with my hand chopped off, that we won't have a hand in the future. But the challenge can be for some types like us to understand that we're going to feel bad when that happens, and that's the real motivator. It's not a video game. If we have to operate in a handicapped fashion in some way because of our impulsiveness has cost us some long-term capacity for some short-term outcome, which is our tendency, then we're going to suffer in the realm of feeling. And that's where the real outcomes lie. We're so detached from our feelings that we make bad decisions about ourselves. We're not detached from other people's feelings. We do understand when other people are suffering, and we are empathetic. We don't understand that how people are going to feel later, maybe. Like, that's not something we're particularly deft at. We can anticipate that. By that point, we're into the thinking area, and we're fine. You know, we don't need to really worry about that. Then we started working on from sort of value axioms and stuff like that. But yeah, ESTPs are supposed to be the most likely to be sociopaths? I agree. They're the types that are most likely to be sociopaths. ENTPs are actually,
ESTPs scare the hell out of me.
I like them fine. They're fine. They're not usually sociopaths, but occasionally, if they're going to be one, that would be the case because, well, I mean, Compton's a murderer. You know, she's a murderer with the pigs. She sees those pigs and she wants to get them. And I saw her today looking at the guinea pig, and I was like, Compton, and she immediately slunk away because the last time when she murdered the pigs, and then she killed the mother and she killed the baby, and then the other two babies were left motherless. I hit Compton with a stick. And that's something I would normally ever do, but of course she had forfeited her rights by committing murder. So
who is Shirky Shirkalot? What is that?
is that not you?
No, it's not. I have no idea what that is.
Well, probably using the word shirk in its normal sense. It is, after all,
Possibly.
a vocabulary word. So, okay, we were talking about, what were we talking about? Oh, yeah, interesting as an emotion. So, the question has been raised, is everything basically stem from emotions at the end of the day? And Negron would say, yeah. And they'd say that the ENTP's core emotion is fear. It drives us in all matters. We're afraid of embarrassing ourselves. We're afraid of being perceived as stupid. We're afraid of dying. We're afraid of being alone. We're afraid of all kinds of things. So, let's talk about that. To the extent that we're engaged in all this analysis, how distant is it from the emotions of origin, and does it matter whether or not we know the emotional origins or link it back to that? Let's go down the line and see if we can get as many voices who want to speak as possible. So let's start with Callum. Do you have any thoughts on this? Not sure.
What was the question? Sorry.
The question is, to what extent is the fact that our analysis probably stems from some core underlying emotion, like ENTP, Enneagram would say the 5-6-7s, or is it, yeah, 5-6-7s are fear-based. So then the question becomes, to what extent we're doing a lot of analysis that requires this beginning assumption that feelings are more or less irrelevant in the calculus of the determined conclusions. So, to what extent does it actually matter that these things may be of origin to emotion, and how important is it to link back to the emotion of origin when we're talking about abstractions? Nandi, any thoughts? Oh, I'm okay. Yeah, I understand, Callum. I was waiting for Nandi. I thought she was going to respond. If Nandi wants to think about it a bit, that's fine.
No, sorry. I still don't get it.
Okay, QB Sauce, do you have any thoughts on the question? I'm talking about the fact that when I'm engaged in an analysis like this, purportedly, I'm not engaged in an emotional process. We're not talking about how things that we're talking about make people feel in general. I'm saying, well, when I'm doing analysis about what the government ought to do, for example, I'm not talking about the problem being that some people are going to get their feelings hurt. I'm talking about we need a limiting principle that applies regardless of how people feel about it in the short term, because it's going to protect everybody's interest in the long term. So I'm making this distinction between, there's often being a distinction made between thinking and feeling, and drawing contrasts between where they disagree. My question is, if in fact the thinking emerges in their origins from an emotion, how important is it for us as rationalists, or as people who are interested in engaging in rational discourse, regardless of whether we're NTs or not, for any such people who are engaged in rational discourse like this, how important is it for us to link it back to the core emotion and understand the way those two things work together? Or does it matter?
It matters only if the problem is causing such a significant problem that it is starting to affect the effectiveness of your day or things you do. So for me, when I feel like when I feel an emotion or something like that, I don't feel like I have developed the required ways to characterize it and understand it on its own terms, so I'm forced to do it objectively, but that's not solving the problem, obviously. So anytime I'm forced to deal with an emotional issue, it goes through all my functions without it being solved. It obviously goes through any no solve, TI, no solve. And then eventually when it gets down to TI, well not TI, but FE or something, it can come out in very problematic ways. And I think because of that, it would be important for us to understand our emotional origins so it doesn't get down our functional stack to cause problems. Because as soon as an emotion gets down to FE, it can result in projecting, it can result in us trying to get more validation, or if it gets down to SI, this shit's just bad.
Well, here's what I'm thinking. See, I'm actually thinking of it more from a strategic perspective. Although everything you're saying makes perfect sense, I'm thinking about it from a perspective of one of the challenges that NTs face is in communicating with portions of the population who basically view what we're doing as splitting hairs unnecessarily. That it doesn't really matter. You know, I think the example I used and when I talked to your grandfather is perfect. It's the example I'm going to go with from now on. The parking ticket. I mean, the littering ticket thing. Okay, so you're at a city council meeting. You're a couple of city council members. One person litters. One person, there's a littering problem. One person suggests let's make a ticket and a fine and put a cop there. Another person says, well, let's look at the core principles, the founding principles of the city charter, and derive our course of action from that. Like, which of those two do you prefer? I think that's a good way to distinguish between, to point out what our basic challenge is. To tell people who are just trying to get the litter problem solved, that we need to worry about these fancy talk things that don't have anything to do with our city's litter problem, is always a challenge. And so I think we need to acknowledge what emotion, what negative emotion, or what the emotional sources of our advocacies are, both good and bad. Like, look, the reason I'm worried about this littering law is because I am afraid. I have fear. And I have fear that humans are capable of taking action based on certain assumptions, and they don't really know what's going to happen. And then you go from there, linking back into some way. To the extent that we can link arguments back to emotions, to the extent that that's possible, we work closer towards universalizable framework, because it's going to have to be something that makes sense to people who don't engage in this kind of parsing. So that's my thinking on that at the moment. Let's go down and see if anybody else has any comments on this topic that I haven't heard from yet. Plebeian Eric, you came in late, but we're talking about the original question is interesting an emotion? So if you want to chime in, you can certainly do that. Shirky Shirk a lot, are you here? Do you have audio or video you would be willing to turn on to communicate with us? If not, you're welcome to just chat. There's no requirement that you turn anything on, obviously, but I don't know. Let me see what it's at the bottom. Yeah, it is at the bottom. Okay, cool. Zach Tack, any thoughts on this? Okay. Okay, so I think that in general the answer to the question is interesting in emotion. No, but it may be how NTs connect back to their emotions. That we start with the level away and return to it through our beliefs as we develop them. Our abstractions, that we start to place more or less weight on certain abstractions than others. T-shirts, you want to finish this up with some last commentary on this? I don't doubt that you have some final thoughts you wouldn't mind getting across as well.
About the about interest. Well, I think it's subjective. I think it can be considered subjective whether or not interest is an emotion, because some people, I mean, if you experience a certain set of feelings when you experience interests that are exclusive to the feeling of quote-unquote interest, then you could consider it an emotion, but I'm not sure if everybody experiences that. Back to the, I guess, the NT emotion thing. I think if you would consider every I learned to understand my functions like every one of them is an information outlet. Right? So any information outlet is the world, and from now to infinity, and every possible connection that can be made with the objective data and whatever in the external world. And then introverted thinking is just my core principles and ways of understanding material that comes from any. And if you get all the way down to SI, it's never used. And so when I'm forced to deal with SI issues, I don't have the information required to attain to those issues. So it just results in it's just like, to me, it's just a lack of experience or information in a certain function that causes it to be as bad as it is. So when I'm forced to deal with
experience is a better word than information, and I think practice and habit is a better way of thinking about it, right? Because you're saying, well, I'm using these tools, but they're not exactly tools so much as avenues of understanding or avenues of framing. And so it's like, it's really saying, how am I gonna experience my internal headspace for more hours of the day, and how am I going to experience it for less? How am I going to experience it for less? How am I going to experience it for least? And then there's no more options than that, right? The rest of them are unconscious. You don't experience them consciously at all. So it's really like, we think of it as tools because we can shift between these mindsets or approaches. That's why when Zachary said the other day, oh, people are random about their behavior, he was defaulting to the fact that he uses that perspective 1/4 as often as he uses TI. And so that predictive perspective that he has is something that when he asked initially, well, are people predictive? I mean, can you predict them well? His initial answer is no, because I spend almost no time focusing on predicting them. I spend instead my time focusing on this other thing. So for you, it's going to be like, well, is it easy for you to use this tool, SI? Well, no, because you spend almost no time using it. It requires time and attention to be done at all, let alone well, you know? And the same thing is true for all of our functions. So the only one that we can't really reflect on in that fashion is our dominant function. We can't reflect on it because I think it's impossible for us to conceive of being awash in a different kind of water as a fish in this ocean, you know? I'd like to be able to, but I can't imagine what it would be like. So I can sort of imagine SE. I can sort of imagine what SE would be like.
I had a few videos on my channel where I was trying to like understand what, like, that's, you know, I made the video where I was asking people to like make descriptions of what having a function is actually like, you know, for a dominant person. Because for me or for you, like a different function that's not dominant, it requires conscious effort, and we realize, like, okay, we're doing this right now, and it's different than what we normally do, except then we always just, like, default back to, like, our autopilot, which is, like, dominant, you know?
Right. Okay, so, Basement Overlord, pleasure to see you. Welcome. Always nice having you here. And we're going to draw this topic to a close. This topic was called Interesting. Is interesting an emotion? And we concluded that no, but a bunch of other words. Or sort of yeah, but no, but yeah, but a bunch of other words. Thanks for watching.